Okay, welcome back, everyone. We're ready to get started. I hope everyone had a nice lunch. We have a great afternoon for you, starting with Paige Jackson's Midwifery and At-Risk Communities presentation. Paige is here with us, and I'm going to pull up her slide so that we can get ready to do your introduction. Give people a few more minutes to join back on. Okay. Paige Jackson is a mother, birth worker, and clinic director of Abide Women's Health Services in Dallas, Texas. A native of Little Rock, Arkansas, Paige is the mother of one daughter, Sydney Rachel, who passed away in 2010 due to prematurity. She is the great-great-granddaughter of Henrietta Harris, a granny midwife who served communities in Central Arkansas for 35 plus years and who still serves as a source of inspiration to Paige today. Paige is a 2020 graduate of Mercy in Action College of Midwifery and the 2017 recipient of the Claudia Booker Memorial Midwife Scholarship, a scholarship recently renamed after her passing in early 2020 in honor of her friend and midwifery mentor, midwife Claudia Booker. Paige completed the clinical portion of her midwifery training at Mercy Birth Center and New Beginnings Birth Center, both located in Boise, Idaho. Always having a strong interest in maternal health, Paige brought with her to midwifery school almost 10 years of hospital experience, working as a CNA, secretary on labor delivery, mother-baby, NICU, PICU, and in various outpatient clinics. After losing her daughter, Sydney, in 2010, she has become even more determined to play a role in helping to change the United States maternal health care crisis, especially as it pertains to Black women who are 3 to 4 times more likely to die surrounding the childbirth. Paige is a former board member for the Idaho Breastfeeding Coalition, a charter member of the Idaho chapter of the National Association of Certified Professional Midwives, and a member of National Black Midwives Association. Her heart is always to share the truth about what Black women experience in the U.S. healthcare system. Please welcome Paige, and I am going to give you the control to be able to share your screen, Paige. Okay, you should have it now.
Awesome. Hi, guys, and happy Friday. Thank you so much for having me. As I present, I'm going to go away. I'm going to turn my video off and present and just show my slides. And then once I finish, I'll come back and you'll see my lovely face. Okay, let me know if you guys can see that. Katie, can you let me know?
I do see it.
Awesome, awesome. So as Katie stated, I will be presenting on midwifery and at-risk communities. And the title or topic title of my presentation is Strange Fruit, How the United States Maternal Healthcare System Has Failed Black Women. And again, just to reiterate, I am a 2020 graduate of Mercy in Action College of Midwifery and am waiting to sit for my boards. Hopefully it will be sometime soon. COVID has kind of deferred some things. And I am the clinical director of Abide Women's Health Services in sunny South Dallas. I would like to add a disclaimer. You will be presented with some heavy truths in this presentation. And if at any point you feel uncomfortable with the information being shared, I encourage you to sit with and not run from that discomfort. I encourage you to fight disregarding the information presented should you not find any lived life relatability. I found that it's only when we ourselves are no longer comfortable that we can find the courage to speak up on behalf of those who lack comfort and the experience of those around us. So my presentation objectives is to, one, offer attendees a new way to view the term at risk, to present an abbreviated historical foundation of the maternal health care, to discuss the connection of the foundations of maternal health care to the current disparities surrounding Black maternal health. So the overall presentation message is that it is racism against the Black body and not the race of the Black body that makes Black bodies more susceptible or at risk of death surrounding childbirth. And so it is my hope that by the end of this presentation, you will leave with tangible ways that you can do your part to help alter the trajectory of Black maternal health care, helping to one day achieve life-affirming change. And then with the overall presentation message, if you remember nothing else that I shared today, please remember this message. Write it down, tweet about it, send it in a group text. But no matter how you choose to do it, don't forget to give me credit. And so the overall message of this entire presentation is that it's a stress from the effects of systemic racism, of being treated less than human, that is at the root of why Black bodies are considered at risk. And I define myself as a root trafficker, which means I would rather spend the bulk of my time and energy locating and discussing the root of why instead of focusing on the fruit produced. Because I've learned that when we locate and dismantle the root, then the fruit will take care of itself. And in order to make a noticeable, impactful, and lasting change, we have to do the work to locate and then dismantle this tangled root. So before we get started, I want to share some definitions so that we're all on the same page. So Black and African American, a people group not born in Africa, but who share similar genetic makeup, often physically and genetically, to the continent of Africa. Life affirming. What I mean by that is the belief that indicates that life has value from the beginning into the...
Paige, I'm sorry, I don't want to interrupt you, but I'm getting some messages from people saying that they are unable to hear. So before you go any further, I want to just make sure that we get that worked out because I don't want anybody to miss this message.
Exactly. Let me try putting on my headphones and see if that will help. Or turning it up more. Can you guys hear me better? I turned the volume up. Let's see if that helps. If not, I'll grab my headphones.
I am able to hear you. We could ask one of the other panelists to unmute quickly and tell us if you're able to hear.
This is Kayla. I am able to hear you, and after you turned it up, it still sounded at the same volume level.
Okay, let me grab my headphones then.
So we're getting some messages that people can hear. Okay. It sounds like that person was able to figure out what the issue was. So I'm so sorry to interrupt you.
No.
Please forgive that and continue on.
Okay, so I'm good to keep going. Okay, so we were talking about life affirming. It's a belief that indicates that life has value from the beginning until the last breath and everything in between. And then when we talk about Black maternal health care, it is health care of women that identify as Black and who are of childbearing age. When we define at risk, it's a state or condition marked by a high level of risk or susceptibility. And then when we look at systemic racism, it's a systemic oppression of a racial group to the social, economic, and political advantage of another. And so since it is racism against the Black body and not the race of the Black body that makes Black bodies more susceptible or at risk of death surrounding childbirth, let's break down systemic racism a little further. So systemic racism includes the policies and practices entrenched in established institutions, which result in the exclusion or promotion of designated groups. It differs from overt discrimination in that no individual intent is necessary. It manifests itself in two ways. The first way is through institutional racism, and it's a racial discrimination that derives from individuals carrying out the dictates of others who are prejudiced or of a prejudiced society. And then structural racism are the inequalities rooted in the system-wide oppression of a society that excludes substantial numbers of members of a particular group from significant participation in major social institutions. And so since my topic today is to speak on midwifery in at-risk communities, I want to first start by asking you, when you hear the words at risk, who and or what do you think of? Webster defines at risk as the exposure to the possibility of danger, harm, or loss. And for many people, they associate at risk with Black, inner city, underfunded communities and or other communities of color. So if you would allow me the time today, I want to help shift your mindset to not only see the term at risk and associate it to an individual's behavior that may make them more susceptible to an adverse outcome, but to see those words and begin to evaluate a picture much bigger than one individual and actually that of an entire system. So to begin to understand how the current maternal healthcare system has failed Black women, we must travel through history 400 years back to chattel slavery to find the root of when control of Black reproduction began and the leading roles Black enslaved women played in the foundations of the practices of modern obstetrics and gynecology. See, the reproduction and childbearing of child women helped to ensure the continuation of the enslaved labor force. This gave slave owners an incentive to control the reproductive lives of enslaved women. With that being said, let's talk about how healthcare has failed Black women in many ways. But for the sake of time, we'll just focus on 3 ways. So the first way is by failing to hear Black women. And we see that through the foundations of obstetrics and gynecology. And I want to read to you guys a quote from Dorothy Roberts. She wrote the book, Killing the Black Body, Race, Reproduction, and the Meaning of Liberty. And she says, the brutal domination of slave women's procreation laid the foundation for centuries of reproductive regulation that continues today. I'll read it again. The brutal domination of slave women's procreation laid the foundation for centuries of reproductive regulation that continues today. So the foundation of what we know to be the practice of modern gynecology was based on the body and the pain of enslaved Black women without their consent. So we take a look at the life of Dr. Marion Sims, who's considered the father of modern gynecology. He was an Alabama surgeon and plantation physician who performed a series of experimental surgeries on Black enslaved women during 1845 and 1849. Although these experiments resulted in the first successful operation on a woman with a vesto-vaginal fistula, a channel that develops between the vagina and the bladder, most often caused by complications after traumatic childbirth, the discovery didn't come without controversy, as it is noted that Sims perfected his technique on Black enslaved women without offering medication. He failed to offer pain medication under the racist notion that is still very much so present today, that Black people, especially Black women, have thicker skin, higher pain tolerance, and do not feel pain the same way that white people do. Remember, at this time, the value of an enslaved woman was tied to her production and her reproduction. So that's how much work she could do in the field, how many enslaved children she could produce. And by having these fistulas, they could not continue with childbirth and also had difficulty working. So when we look at the story of Dr. Sims, there are 10 enslaved women central to his story, but only 3 of them were named in his writings. So Annika, Betsy, and Lucy, all who were brought to Sims by their owner for repair. Annika was a 17-year-old who survived 30 painful and unsuccessful surgeries, along with Betsy and Lucy, who all are the mothers of modern gynecology. Now, there's some debate on whether or not these women were truly able to give their consent, but if we understand history and the time period in which Sims and these slaves lived, there was no true informed disclosure or of the pros and cons of the procedure to receive proper consent from these slave women. And if we understand history, we would understand that the procedure happened to the slave women whether they consented or not because their bodies were not their own, but instead belonged to their slave masters for him to do what he willed. And so medical experimentation on the people of color was not an uncommon practice at the time, and often has continued to occur long after the abolishment of slavery. Such experiments were considered socially acceptable, reflecting the influence of racism on the history of medical research and practice in the United States. So if we move to Dr. Joseph DeLee, who's considered the father of modern obstetrics, he was a Chicago physician that practiced in the early 20th century, and who believed that mechanical interventions such as forceps delivery could prevent the poor outcomes that sometimes resulted from childbirth in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Dr. DeLee believed routine medical intervention would allow physicians to control the course of labor and to prevent the damage that birth could create. He believed that labor unaided was pathogenic or causing disease because, in his experience, natural labor adversely affected a woman's health. This natural process, Dr. Lee concluded, in fact, put a woman at great risk for their life and health. His advocacy of such techniques of not waiting to cure the problem if it developed, but instead interfering to prevent it from developing, is often blamed for the rise in mechanical interventions during childbirth. Dr. DeLee is also credited with writing about the necessity for a single standard of good obstetrics for all women, which is great. But he also carried the thought that midwives gave the most inferior care due to lack of training, professionalism, and cultural roots, which lowered the dignity of obstetrics, art, and science. So his first line of defense in lowering maternal mortality was to raise the status of the medical profession. Believing that there was hope for upgrading the practice of substandard care provided by physicians, he, on the flip side, insisted that evidence from European nations suggested that midwives were unchangeable. So this began the push to put out of business midwives who were often the only caregivers serving predominantly Black, rural, and underfunded areas. And then I wanted to insert this slide just to give a visual of the women who the foundation of modern gynecology were built on the backs of. So remember their names, remember their stories, and include them in your histories. These women were not heard, but they gave their bodies without proper consent. The second way that the current healthcare system has failed Black women, by not believing us and by eradicating the granny midwives. So I'll read the quote that's on the screen. It says, physicians did not gently elbow out their competition as birth grew increasingly medicalized in the 20th century. In South Carolina and elsewhere, they actively advocated for the elimination of granny midwives in medical journals. Consequently, women of color suffered devaluation and stigmatization and were viewed as illegitimate medical practitioners. So the lack of self-autonomy over Black bodies continued past the eradication of chattel slavery with the 13th Amendment in 1865. At the turn of the 20th century, we see, following the abolishment of slavery, and with many medical institutions refusing to serve Black families, many Black women continuing to do birth work using skills they learned from their native lands within their present communities. Black traditional midwives typically gained experience in their youth, working alongside seasoned midwives who were often referred to as grannies. Grannies were respected and highly esteemed members of their communities, serving communities without access, systemically, financially, geographically, to a doctor or a hospital. Their patients generally being both Black and white with little or no access to medical care. So just to share a brief history of granny midwives, or grand midwives, as some of them stated before their passing that they would like to be called. The Shepherdtown Act of 1921 provided federal funding for maternity and child care. The act played a huge role in the medicalization of pregnancy and childbirth and the establishment of health care centers in rural areas. The act provided a guide to instruction of hygiene, on maternity care, and infant care through public health nurses, visiting nurses, the distribution of educational materials on prenatal care, and the regulation and licensure of midwives. With many hospitals at this time still denying service or providing less than standard service to Black bodies, the eradication of Black traditional midwives who made house calls, who were respected in their community for their knowledge and wisdom, who had lived life relatability to her community, medically devastated and left Black communities and many rural areas without healthcare providers. Many Black communities without the continuation of knowledge and wisdom the traditional midwife possessed and shared with their clients. The rural, predominantly Black, underfunded, and underserved areas once served by Black traditional midwives are now most often the areas we call maternal healthcare deserts. These are areas in which there are limited to no maternal healthcare providers, causing women to have to travel long hours by car, bus, or taxi to neighboring cities to be seen by a maternal healthcare provider. In the 2018 report from the March of Dimes, they reported that more than 5 million women in the United States live in a maternity care desert, and about 1,085 counties in the United States have hospitals without service for pregnant women. Almost 150,000 babies are born to women living in maternal care deserts. So as I shared above or previously, many of the statistics that are found in predominantly Black, underfunded and underserved communities. So the third way that the United States maternal healthcare system has failed Black women is the lack of accessibility to care, kind of what I just touched on at the end of the last one, and the intersectionality of racism and healthcare. So for many Black women, married or unmarried, young or old, when pregnancy happens, too often it occurs as an afterthought to all of the social determinants and systemic racism that we experience every day as a Black person. Social determinants are defined as healthcare systems and the conditions in which people are born, grow up, live, work, and age that profoundly influence the health of individuals and subsequently impact the health of populations at large. So it's supposed to be a basic necessity to be granted access to clean water, environmentally friendly air, paid a living wage to afford the basic necessities of life, be treated with respect when seeking medical care, but it is often basic necessities that are not afforded to Black communities. And so social determinants of health, systemic racism, and lack of education about our bodies, lack of access to medical care and or insurance to cover medical care, all play a role in the increased number of unwanted pregnancies that lead to the increased abortions that occur in the Black communities. These increased unintended pregnancy rates also reflect the particular difficulties that many women in Black communities face in accessing contraceptive services and in their choosing birth control method and in using their chosen birth control method consistently and effectively over long periods of time. So all these present and historical realities must be seen in a larger context and for the damaging root created and fed by racism. For many Black people, due to the history of being treated like property and not humans, of having medical decisions made for us without being properly educated to obtain true informed consent, and a history of the medical world using Black bodies as test subjects, leads to a huge distrust in healthcare providers who are not Black, be it in the hospital or in the out-of-hospital setting. This truth feeds into implicit bias, which refers to the attitudes or stereotypes that affect our understanding, actions, and decisions in an unconscious manner. For example, if a provider already has a believed, even if false, stereotype about a patient in their head, just from reading the patient's name, seeing their race, reading their chief complaint, Then when in front of the doctor or midwife, how will the patient's concerns ever be heard over the provider's assumptions? The truth is, when it comes to Black bodies, they rarely are. So implicit bias is believing that a Black person is just seeking emergency care because they are drug seeking and or lying about pain to gain pain medicine. Implicit bias is giving a Black woman on Medicaid subpar care because you don't think she deserves better service because she's not paying for it, like private insurance or cash pay patients. Implicit bias is midwives seeking to serve Black families and expecting them to be the teacher while ignoring the wealth of information found on the World Wide Web and in books. Implicit bias is believing that all pregnancies of Black families are unplanned or that all Black mothers are unwed before pregnancy. Implicit bias is calling a Black husband a partner or a boyfriend. Implicit bias is believing that Black bodies need saving without actually hearing and listening to Black bodies. So recently, one of our Abide board members made a statement as it pertains to Black maternal health. She said, "We want babies delivered at term, thriving in their first year, and we want their mothers to live to see them." I'll read it again. She said, "We want babies delivered at term, thriving in their first year, and we want their mothers to live to see them." So when we look at the term at risk in relation to Black communities, we must see the bigger system of systemic racism at work. Because it is racism against Black bodies and not the race of Black bodies that have led to the disparities you see listed on the screen. And it's not because we as Black people were born inherently different. It's because since the beginning, Black bodies have failed to be considered human, to be heard when we cry, and to be heard when we report pain. So based on reporting from the Center for Disease Control, when compared to white women, Black women are 3 to 4 times more likely to die surrounding childbirth. For a Black woman over the age of 30, she is 4 to 5 times more likely to die surrounding childbirth. A Black woman with a college education, she is 5 times more likely to die surrounding childbirth than a white woman who didn't graduate high school. And Black children are 2 to 3 times to not survive until their first birthdays. A 2016 study on racial bias in pain medicine found that Black Americans are systemically undertreated for pain versus white Americans. And the study found that white providers who carry an implicit bias that Black people's skin is thicker than white people's skin reported lower pain ratings for Black patients versus white. This study suggested that individuals with at least some medical training may use false beliefs about biological differences between Blacks and whites to inform medical judgments, which may contribute to the racial disparities in pain assessment and treatment. And sadly, from the statistics we see on the screen, we know that these disparities do not change based on educational status or tax bracket. Like with Serena Williams. Serena is a world-known tennis pro who knew her body well enough to listen when it told her something was wrong. So in September of 2017, on the day after delivering her baby by emergency C-section, Serena lost her breath and recognized the warning signs of a serious condition. She managed to walk out of her hospital room, approach a nurse while gasping her words. Being a professional athlete who experienced blood clots before, she feared another blood clot and attempted to advocate for herself by requesting a CT scan and an IV of heparin. The nurse believed that Serena's pain medicine was just making her confused and dismissed her. Serena insisted that something was wrong and a test was finally ordered, but it was just an ultrasound on her legs to address the swelling. When that turned up nothing, she was finally sent for the lung CT that she asked for previously. It found several blood clots. And just as she had suggested, heparin did the trick. And sadly, her ordeal wasn't over. The severe coughing she experienced reopened her C-section incision, and subsequent surgery revealed a hemorrhage at the site. And when she was finally released from the hospital, she was confined to her bed for 6 weeks. Or when we take a look at other Black women, like Kiara Johnson, a mother who passed from complications after a scheduled cesarean section, 12 hours after she delivered her son. Her bladder was nicked, and the internal bleeding had been discovered too late. Or Shalon Irving, she was an epidemiologist for the CDC, and she died within the very system that she had fought against. She was quoted saying, "I see inequality wherever it exists. I call it by name and I work to eliminate it." Or just as of recent, Dr. Shanice Wallace, who was a pediatric resident in Indiana, who died this year after developing preeclampsia the day her daughter was delivered prematurely via C-section. Like strange fruit, southern tree bears a strange fruit, blood on the leaves and blood at the root, black bodies swinging in the southern breeze, strange fruit hanging from the popular trees, pastoral scenes of the gallant South, the bulging eyes and the twisted mouth, the scent of magnolias sweet and fresh, then the sudden smell of burning flesh. Here's to the fruit for the crows to pluck, for the rain to gather and the wind to suck, for the sun to rot and for the trees to drop. Here's a strange and bitter crop. So the poem that I just read you was written in 1937, and it was famously sung by many artists, but most notably Billie Holiday and Nina Simone. It's a poem or a song put to words about the lynching of African Americans in southern United States during the Jim Crow era. In the lyrics, Black victims are portrayed as strange fruit as they hang from trees, rotting in the sun, blowing in the wind, and becoming food for crows upon being burned. So the heightened risk of maternal and infant mortality in the Black communities can be traced back 70 years ago to the beginning of the eradication of the granny midwives. The current healthcare system failed us by pushing them out. The heightened risk can also be likened to the lynchings of the Jim Crow era. The only difference is Black women aren't being hung from trees, but instead they are being killed by the implicit bias and racist thoughts their healthcare providers, doctors, and midwives alike may carry. So I don't share all of this to point finger or to pass blame. I also don't share from just what I've heard, but based on the systemic racism I fought through when I became pregnant with my daughter, Sydney Rachel, in 2010. See, I was working, but not working enough to qualify for insurance. Educated, but not enough to safely navigate my way through the Medicaid and WIC systems. Doing all that I could to not allow the stress of life to overcome me, a battle that I wasn't successful in winning. Because on February 9th, 2010, at 26 weeks, I delivered a 1 pound, 7 ounce baby girl that I said we named Sydney Rachel. And then 21 days later, I was faced with a task no mother should ever have to. I held my baby as she died in my arms. Now, I don't share my truth for sympathy. I share so that you can get a realistic view of just how close this topic hits home for me and why I'm so passionate about Black maternal health. There are many pregnant African American women, Black women, fighting for their lives and for the lives of their children, daily. We have to stop saying that the midwifery model of care will save Black women, because the truth of the matter is it is still a part of a larger racist system. And until we can unearth and deal with the racist root that the United States maternal health care system was founded on, we will continue to lose Black women. The only difference is their dead bodies won't be hanging on magnolia trees of the South. Instead, they will continue to be found laying on the gurneys of medical institutions around this country. So how can you help? One, you can learn about and check your own implicit biases. You can continue to educate yourself and remain a lifelong learner on the effects of implicit bias and racism. You can listen to and amplify the voices of Black maternal health care advocates. Help to fund Black organizations, Black-led organizations that align with your values. Play your part to help give voice to and enact laws and policies that protect Black bodies. Listen when Black people share their lived life experience without taking offense or centering on self. Understand that social determinants of health must be addressed through policies that raise income, build wealth, provide access to clean, safe, and affordable housing, improve the quality of education, prioritize reliable public transportation and transportation for medical appointments, and increase the availability of fresh, healthy, affordable food. It is my hope that as you listen to my presentation and to my story, that it pushes you towards change. That you listen to find out what part you play in combating the explicit racial biases that Black women are facing in healthcare, in and out of the hospital. That you will leave knowing some tangible ways that you can play a part in fighting maternal mortality, to help our babies live past their first birthdays, and to help us live to see them make that milestone. So just more information about an organization that you can partner with to help. Abide Women's Health Services, right in sunny South Dallas. We exist to improve birth outcomes in communities with the lowest quality of care. And we do this, we address maternal mortality, infant mortality, low birth weight, prenatal care, and teen pregnancy by providing an easy, accessible clinic model that is free from judgment. And so supporting organizations like Abide and other Black-led organizations is a way that you can help us do the work and to help change the outcomes for Black women surrounding maternal health and to help heal how the current medical healthcare system has failed us.
Thank you so much, Paige. That was a wonderful presentation, and I appreciate you being able to just jump right back in. I'm so impressed. I've been totally derailed. So we are going to, let's see, I'm going to open it up for some Q&A. Let me see how I can share this real quick. Okay, so let me figure out how I can get back to the Q&A. Well, I'm afraid that I'm going to have to get out of this screen to be able to see. Sorry about this.
No worries.
This is just okay. So let's see, we have, that was wonderful. Thank you, Paige. Paige, thank you.
Thank you.
Heard, thank you so much. If anybody has any questions they'd like to ask, please submit them.
Yeah. Thank you, guys. Thank you. Thank you.
I am trying to look through. Let's see. How do I, as a midwife, help train and promote Black students other than just taking them on as students?
Yeah, I would say connecting with any Black midwives that are in the area. I know that, it's limited because there are, with the midwifery workforce, it's 98% white and 2% Black. And so reaching out to other Black midwives who can help train, be a secondary trainer, even if they're not able to be meek or norm or sign up on paperwork as of yet, and really listening to what they have to say about what it means to go through that process. But also the reality is it's financially hard for a lot of Black students. And so providing some sort of, not incentive, but some sort of package for your students, be it gas, be it food, something to help them get through the process, because it's a lot harder than many people will discuss.
Thank you. Another question says, you suggested that it would be good if we all find ways to work on identifying and overcome our implicit bias. Do you have any suggested organizations to begin helping individuals with this process?
Yes, so we actually have a training tomorrow that will kind of walk through that. But Harvard also has a questionnaire on their website where you can go, and it's surprising how we think we don't have these views, certain views of people. But Harvard has this breakdown of quiz that you can take that kind of bring those present realities to the forefront of your mind. So those would be two things. So come and sign up for our training. It's not too late. And also work through the quiz or the questionnaire that Harvard has so that you can kind of figure out where your implicit bias foundation lies.
Okay, thank you. This says, Paige, do you model your center clinic after the JJ way? I believe I heard someone mention that and wanted to hear you talk about that.
Yeah, so it's not an exact replica, but that is the foundation of our clinic. And I would be remiss if we did not honor what she has done in the midwifery world and how she has changed statistics in Florida. So absolutely, much of our clinic basis is built on the JJ Way and Mama Jenny Joseph's work.
Okay, one of our advisory board members, Dr. Guillory, says, thank you for this excellent presentation and the work that you do every day. My question is the concern that we are doing a lot of implicit trainings, but that allows us to check the box. What one thing can we do to overall system change?
So a lot of people, when we think about system change, we think very big umbrella first. A lot of the system changes start within ourselves, but also within people who are around us, our inner circles. So calling out racist parents or calling out racist grandparents, when you learn information, sharing it with them, because as you begin to learn and grow, that ripple effect will hit the rest of the people who are around you, and then we will eventually see a worldwide system change.
Thank you. Dr. Guillory says, I agree. And we have a question that says, can you list the link for the Abide training? Yes. And how do we sign up for the training?
Absolutely. So if you go to our Instagram, it's actually on our bio. I don't know the link right off the top of my head. My apologies. But the link is listed in our bio on Instagram, and our Instagram handle is abide_women.
Okay, abide_women is the Correct. Instagram account. Okay.
Mm-hmm. And our the sign up for the training tomorrow, it's a virtual training, is in our bio on Instagram.
Okay, great. One more question. Does Abide accept Medicaid?
Currently, no. We are so part of the JJ Way model is to serve women regardless of their ability to pay. So a lot of our services are free or low cost, donation based. So currently our clinic runs on donations, and prenatal care is donation based. So we ask for $10 per prenatal visit. But if a client can't afford to pay that, then we don't refuse them service. So currently we do not accept insurance because most of our clinic is ran on donations, grants, or donations from the community.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Paige. We really appreciate the
Thank you, guys.
presentation.